Hey everybody, it's Christine with Zeidman Development, and today I'd like to walk you through working with default criteria sets in Importacular. Just to let you know, we do have two videos for criteria sets. We have this video that looks at the default criteria sets. We also have another video that's going to look at criteria sets that are specific to templates. So I do encourage you to watch both videos to get a good picture of how to use criteria sets to maximize Importacular and to best match your data to data that's already in Razor's Edge as you're importing into Razor's Edge from whatever your data source may be. So in order to access our default criteria set, we do need to come from the screen that I'm on here, which is where you would select your data source. So rather than selecting a data source, I'm going to come up to the top and click on criteria sets. When I do that, you can see I've got four different options for my default criteria sets. I have a default individual constituent set, a default organization constituent set, a default individual relationship set, and a default organization relationship set. So the first two, the individual and organization constituent sets, are available to all Importacular users. And that's how Importacular matches individual and organization constituents to data that's already in Razor's Edge. The third option here for the default individual relationship set helps you match individual relationships to relationships that already exist in Razor's Edge. So if you're working with an import and it includes a spouse relationship mapping, you would use the individual relationship set in order to match that spouse record, that individual relationship spouse record, to the one that's already in Razor's Edge. So in order to use that, you do need to have the individual relationship destination. The organization relationship set is similar to that individual relationship set. It allows you to match an organization relationship to an organization relationship that's already in Razor's Edge. So for example, if we have a constituent and we are mapping a relationship for their employer, and that employer is listed as an organization relationship, this is going to look to see if that employer is already a relationship in Razor's Edge. So the relationships look at both constituent and non-constituent relationships, and they do help you avoid adding duplicate relationships. Since the individual constituent set and the organization constituent set are available for all users, I'm going to focus on those today. So let's go ahead and open that individual constituent set here. You can see when we click on it, because we're coming at this from the defaults, it is going to give us a message to make sure we know that changing this here means that any template we create after this point is going to be updated with the values that we change in our default criteria sets. So I'm going to tell that yes. So first of all, I want to explain how this screen works. So this is a grid that allows you to work through which layer you want your data to match by first. So the order you see here is important for how your data is going to be matched to the data already in Razor's Edge. So what you can see on our screen right now is that our first priority is looking for a constituent ID. If there's an exact match on the constituent ID, Importacular will stop here, and it's going to mark that record as an update in the review screen. If the constituent ID doesn't match, next it's going to go to the email address. And we've told it as well, email address is an exact match. So if that email address matches, mark it as an update and link that record to the record already in Razor's Edge. Our third row, we're looking at a first name, a surname, an address 1, and a postal code. That's listed as a good match. Now that's going to be our third matching option here. Good matches will also be coded as an update in the review screen. Our last match is just a surname and a postal code, and it's listed as a poor match. So what that means is it's going to come up as a decide. So right now, these are the standard defaults that you would see when you first open Importacular. If you haven't changed anything in Importacular, they're still going to be your standard defaults. But we may want to make a few changes to these depending on how our data has been matching overall. So one thing that you may want to do is add a change to that second row. So if you're working in an organization where families have shared email addresses often, that email address may be causing you to see a lot of decides, because if Bob and Judy Jones and their 3 kids all have the same email address on their record and they're all constituents, Importacular won't know which one of them to mark as an update. So it's going to give you a decide. So one thing we could do is we can open that row for email address. And we can say, in addition to matching the email address, we also want it to match the first name. That way, if it says Bob and the email address, it's going to know from Importacular, it's going to know which one to add that as the person. The other thing that we could do is if we saw a lot of decides for surname and postal code, we might want to make this a bit more challenging. So we might want to add something like the first name and the first name equivalents. That way, in addition to matching a postal code, it also has to match a first name and a surname. This can be helpful, especially in the US, where postal codes are a lot broader. In Canada and the UK and in some other places, postal codes are much more specific, but in the US they're not. So sometimes adding a bit more criteria means you have fewer decides to review. So that's one example of a way that we could do that. Another thing that we could do would be to add another row altogether. So let's say we wanted to leave that first name and equivalent and surname. But let's say we wanted to add an extra row where we want first name and then we want first name equivalents. So first name equivalents are things like Charles and Chuck and Chaz, nicknames that are commonly held for specific names. So another example would be William, Bill, Will, Willie, things like that. We may also want to match by that surname. And then we may want to do the same thing with an address line and address line equivalents. So address line equivalents are things like Ave and Avenue or ST and Street. So common abbreviations that are linked to words and phrases with addresses. So we may want to add that, and then we may want to add a postal code, and then maybe we just want the first half of the postal code. We don't want the whole thing. We can go ahead and tell that okay. Now, this mapping that we just created is more specific than that row 4 that we've already looked at. So why don't we move that up a row? And then we've got nothing in our matched column for that. So in order to have that count and tell it what to do in the review screen, we need to give it a match type. I'm going to go ahead and change that match type to good, because I think if the name and the address match, that is a good match, and I do want that to update to Razor's Edge. So just hope that this gives you an idea of how you can work with these criteria sets. These changes that I've made here will affect all of my templates from this point on. So I don't want to add anything here that's too specific to a task that I'm working on. So I wouldn't want to add a query to this saying only find alumni. I may want to do that with a specific template, but I don't want to do that here in my defaults. But I do want to add things here that may help reduce my number of decides, or that may help me match more accurately overall. I hope that you found this helpful, and thanks for joining me today.